In the case of Red Bull's growth in Formula One, it's because they've invested in the key people to lead the team. And like any army needs a good general leading the way, or any ship needs a good captain. In the case of Red Bull, they have a designer called Adrian Newey, who's the most successful designer in Formula One. His cars have won over 100 Grand Prix, which makes him more successful as a designer than as a driver. He won 90-something Grand Prix as a driver, so he's behind Adrian. But I've always enjoyed that human element of bringing together these people and empowering them to come up with new concepts, new ideas, and to deliver that onto the track. And again, I guess a parallel with this industry is that you're all fighting for market share. You're all fighting to offer more, and your customers are wanting to pay less, or the people you're associated with. So the margins you all operate to is incredibly tight, but you've got to be unique in your segment, and that's always very challenging.
I think there's some parallels to obviously the F1 grid, in a sense, to some iGaming sectors as well. Obviously the top companies and those coming in, flooding in from the bottom. What's the incentive for a new F1 team to come into the industry, knowing how difficult it is to compete at the highest level, even to compete as a mid-table team?
Well, again, if I use Red Bull as an example, and I was with Red Bull from 2005 until 2008, and it's clearly a marketing-led incentive for them. The company already had global recognition before they bought the Formula One team in 2005. What I think a lot of people didn't realise, that the owner of Red Bull is an Austrian called Dietrich Mateschitz, and he was the owner of Sauber. He owned 60% of the Sauber Grand Prix team for over 10 years. But he was he was pretty silent in terms of his involvement in the team. He left it to Peter Sauber to operate. And I think he got to the point where he realised that total ownership was the best way for him to control the marketing, the brand image, and obviously try and get a return on that investment. And as I mentioned earlier, the key to drive success is the human element. You need the right designer, you need the right mechanics, of course the right drivers. So in many ways it's not rocket science to put together all of those people, but the black art in our business is the aerodynamic development, because you're dealing with previously undeveloped technology. But I think that's what makes our sport quite interesting for a lot of these designers. I've met people who've worked in the aircraft industry, which is obviously a very high engineering, high quality business. But when they design a part, it can take 5 years or 10 years before they physically have that part in their hand or see it in operation, because of the various lead times and restrictions that are there in the aircraft industry. Where in Formula One, obviously, every car is a prototype. It only races for 18 races between March and October. So if you design a part, then within a week or within a day or however long it takes to manufacture that part, you can physically see it and you can have it on the car and see if it gives you results. So from a design point of view and an engineering point of view, it attracts a lot of high-end people.
Okay. You mentioned Adrian Newey before, who I think throughout the Formula One paddock is recognised as making some of the most beautiful cars on the grid. How important is the chassis in this? Because obviously, if you look at the cars in this season's grid, the Red Bull won't be the fastest in a straight line, but it will be the fastest over one lap and over a race distance. How important are the aerodynamics in sort of bringing downforce of the cars?
Well, in Formula One, aero is king. It's the most important aspect of the overall design. It's generally accepted this year that the Renault engine, which is used by Red Bull, is not the most powerful engine. It's a very, good drivability, but it lacks total horsepower in comparison to Mercedes. But if you have a car which is passing through the corner at a higher mid-corner speed, then that's where the lap time is won. If in the American racing series, the IRL, this week they're qualifying for the Indianapolis 500, they average 220 miles an hour every lap. because they've 4 corners and it's a high-speed oval. So the emphasis on high-speed engine performance and low drag is much more important. Where in Formula One, we've just come off the back of the last race was in Monte Carlo. It's a low-speed track. The average speed is just over 100 miles an hour. So the emphasis on cornering speed is something which is much higher. And these cars are sophisticated aerodynamic devices, that simply speaking, the opposite of an aircraft, which is wanting to take you up into the sky. A Formula One car is trying to push itself into the ground. And that's how it generates its cornering forces. So, obviously the tyres are the only thing that touch the road. So, a bit like in safe sex, the rubber is very important. And you obviously don't want to have a failure when you're in a race car any more than you would if you were making love. So. Sorry if that's not appropriate to the...
No, we have no boundaries here. You could go much further than that. You clearly have a lot of experience, obviously, on the F1 circuit. So besides your ambassadorial role to Jetbull, you're also advising on F1. Do you see that becoming a larger market in sports betting?
Oh, well, I do. As I mentioned at the beginning, I think that I hadn't appreciated way to swap places with my time. Many people were already betting on Formula One. I was aware of football and horse racing and things like that, but I think that basically anything nowadays is fair game for betting. But I think that one of the difficulties in probably the motorsports betting is the fact that very quickly you start to see a form and a predictable form. So I think there's more variability in soccer or other sports where you can get sort of more random results. I still, although I'm not racing in Formula One anymore, I work with the BBC as part of the broadcasting team, so I go to all the Grand Prix, although I did miss the Spanish one because of the Icelandic ash. I don't know if anyone else had travel problems around that time. But, it's interesting for me to see the sport now from a spectator's point of view rather than a driver. That's how I grew up watching the sport on television. And, it's... the development in the type of coverage that we're used to seeing in sports now is, okay, it's not as rapid a development as you're seeing in online gaming or with the power of the internet, but certainly with more and more interactive channels, the customer has more choice and he wants more and more information. So, I think that sometimes we don't give the viewers the credit for being the sophisticated audience that they are. They don't just want to sit there and just basically see the images. They want to have it explained. They want to understand the technology. They want to understand why the driver cocked up the corner or why the team made a bad strategy call. And we've got to obviously try and deliver that information.
So you're seeing this. You're starting to see Formula One from kind of an odds maker's point of view. What are key factors for an odds maker when you're setting a line for a Formula One race?
Well, the strategy is a huge part of the Grand Prix result, and one of the big challenges for the teams are to play the odds between their 2 drivers, because you only have one pit crew, and inevitably in any Grand Prix there'll be a point where there's the optimal moment to stop the car, and that's based on the degradation of the tyres, the fuel effect, previous history of safety cars, incidents, accidents that you've seen. So there's they literally run hundreds of thousands of different parameters and simulations to come up with the quickest way to do the race in an ideal world. Of course, we don't live in an ideal world, so then you have to be reactive to all of the different events that unfold during the actual race itself. So they start with a plan, of course. You've got to have a plan, you've got to have a map of where you're going, but it's something that's they're constantly reacting to lap on lap. The biggest variable in the race in our sport is the driver. The engines lose horsepower over their life, but it's a very controlled and known loss of power. The driver, lap to lap, if he makes a mistake, can drop half a second, which has a big influence on the outcome of the actual race.